It was a bright spring morning when I first realized that what should have been a celebration of laughter and renewal would become the moment I understood just how little I meant to my own blood. The town square was alive. Pastel banners fluttered in the breeze. Children chased one another around stalls painted in candy apple reds and bubblegum pinks. And from somewhere behind me, a brass band struggled valiantly through a jaunty tune. The scent of freshly fried dough and caramel-drizzled apples mingled in the air, promising sweetness and delight. For a fleeting heartbeat, I allowed myself to believe that joy had found me at last. Then Chloe's hand struck my shoulder. Her grip was flat and heavy, and her laughter sharp, cruel, cut through the festival noise like broken glass. "Grandma, keep up, will you?" she mocked. "You're always so slow." Before I could regain my balance on the uneven grass, she shoved. My feet slid out from under me, and I fell face first into a puddle of thick, cold mud. The world spun for a second as I landed the muddy water seeping through the fine summer dress I'd chosen for today's warmth and colour. Children shrieked with delight until they saw who had fallen. Then they laughed, pointing as if my clumsy exit were part of the entertainment. I sat up, trembling as I felt the mud seep deeper, clinging to every crease of my skin. My dress was ruined, but that mattered less than the sting of humiliation. Strangers rushed forward, a young woman with two toddlers fussing over me, a teenager offering a steady hand to stand. I heard their gentle voices ask if I was all right, and behind them I heard the sharp intake of breath, the muffled giggles of distant relatives hiding behind manicured hands. My daughter, Melissa, stood frozen, her eyes darting to her expensive linen blouse, unstained, and back at me, her lips sealing into a hard line. I saw her calculation play across her face. Would helping me ruin her shoes, damage her reputation? She did nothing. Neither did her husband. Neither did Chloe's younger brother, scrolling on his phone as if this were a video game, and I had merely lost a life. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I saw them, all my own family, standing at a safe distance, more concerned with their image than my well-being. The burn of betrayal ignited hotter than the scrape on my knee or the chill seeping into my bones. I forced myself to look into Melissa's eyes, calm yet unreadable, and then at Chloe. In that moment, the world shifted. The shame I was supposed to feel twisted into something stronger resolve. Because this time, their indifference marked the end of my patience. For 50-odd years, I had poured myself into this family. I had been a single mother, losing my husband to cancer when Melissa was just 12. I worked double shifts at the bakery, sold my wedding jewelry to keep her in private school, took out loans for her university tuition, all so that she could climb higher than I had ever dreamed. When Chloe was born, I thought perhaps I had a second chance, a little girl who would need her grandma's cookies and bedtime stories. She was sweet at first, curl-tousled, giggling, calling me Grandma Maggie. But as the years passed, her warmth solidified into entitlement. Her polite facade cracked, revealing smirks and mocking tones. My quaint home was old-fashioned, my company exhausting. The love I thought was reciprocated dissolved into expectation and finally contempt. Yet I endured. I believed that love meant sacrifice, that patience would yield gratitude. I swallowed insult after insult, convinced that one day my family would recognize my devotion. But that shove, Chloe's flat-handed push, tore away every comforting illusion. They didn't love me. They loved what I could provide. And when they no longer needed me, they were ready to discard me. So in the cold mud that morning, I made a vow, never again. I straightened my shoulders' mud-soaked dress, clinging like a second skin, and I looked the world in the eye. The festival's colours blurred around me, but inside, everything was crystal clear. They would regret underestimating me. In the days that followed, I began to pick up the pieces of my shattered dignity. I refused to scrub away the mud, at least not yet, not until I had shown them I was worth more than what they saw. I started by gathering evidence of my competence: annual physical exams, cognitive assessments, memory tests with certified professionals. Each doctor's note, each clear evaluation became a shield against their whispers. If they wanted to argue, I was too frail. I would present a record so robust that any claim of incapacity would crumble. Next, I replaced the legal foundations of my life with Mr. Jenkins, my lawyer of 30 years. I amended my will, created living trusts, and removed any joint accounts that might tempt them. I prepared irrevocable documents that sealed my assets away from those who had proven they saw me as nothing more than a bank account. And I named beneficiaries who had shown genuine care: distant nieces and nephews, old friends, who sent birthday cards and shared meals without asking for anything in return. I did this quietly, deliberately. My family believed they had me cornered. They were building a case behind my back, priming neighbors with concerns about my forgetfulness, discussing assisted living as if I were already gone. I let them talk. I let them whisper, because with every rumor they spread, they wove a thread that would eventually snap under the weight of truth. When the time came, I invited them to a family brunch. We sat around the table, Chloe in her designer jeans, Melissa with her practiced smile, unaware that I held an envelope stamped with my final decision. As Chloe launched into plans for remodeling the sunroom, I slid the envelope across the table. Inside were the disinheritance documents and an eviction notice. Silence fell like a curtain. Their faces drained of color. Their eyes went wide. "You can't do this," Melissa breathed. But I was calm. "I already did," I said simply. Later, they would try to contest filing petitions and vague affidavits about my mental state. But I was ready. Every test result, every notarized trust, every recorded conversation was already submitted to the court. They had no standing, no claim. Within days, the motions were dismissed. Movers came quietly, and their boxes were loaded onto trucks, their departure as silent as their indifference had been. When the last truck pulled away, I stood in my doorway, breathing in the stillness of a home that was truly mine once more. No joy exploded in my chest, only peace. Finally, I was free of the burden they had turned me into. And in the gentle twilight, I whispered to myself, "You only miss me now that I said no." In the next section, we'll explore how a lifetime of sacrifice can blind us to our own worth, and how setting boundaries becomes the first step toward reclaiming our true value. I remember those years as if they were yesterday: the hum of the ovens as dawn broke the heavy bag of flour slung over my shoulder, on my way into the bakery before anyone else arrived, the ache in my back from standing 12 hours straight, shaping dough by hand. By sundown, I'd lock the shop and head across town to clean offices late into the night. Every penny I earned went straight into rent, utilities, and my daughter's schooling. Sometimes I'd skip meals so she could have extra snacks in her lunchbox. I learned to exist on black coffee and willpower, all for the bright eyes of a child who believed her mother could move mountains. At first, Melissa's gratitude warmed me. When report cards arrived with straight A's, she'd throw her arms around my waist. "Thanks, Mum," she'd whisper, cheeks flushed. When she marched across the school stage to accept her diploma, I wept. In those tears was every sleepless night, every worry over tuition, every sacrifice I didn't dare acknowledge. I believed then that love would repay me, that devotion would bloom into devotion in return. Then came college. I remember the pride that swelled in me as I signed loan papers, picturing her in cap and gown. But as Melissa's world expanded, new cities, new friends, new ambitions, mine shrank. The phone calls came less often, the thanks. Mum turned into a brief love you tacked onto a text at midnight. She visited sporadically, staying just long enough to fetch clean towels, swipe through my cabinets for snacks, and leave. When I cooked her favourite meals, she'd nibble politely, eyes on her phone screen already half gone. I chalked it up to her busy life, telling myself that independence was her birthright and pride of mine. When Chloe arrived, I thought the pendulum would swing back to warmth. A granddaughter, tiny fingers wrapped around mine, a new chance to teach the world about unconditional love. For a while, it felt like redemption. Chloe sat on my lap, asking endless questions about the stars, squealing at cookie cutters, and tucking me into blankets fashioned from mismatched quilts. For 20 minutes each visit, I believed everything I had done was worth it. But life has a way of rearranging the cards. Melissa's career took off a lucrative corporate job. Business lunches in glass towers, weekend getaways. My little cottage and old-fashioned recipes no longer fit her narrative. She began to drop hints about grandma duties, interfering with her social calendar. "Mum, it's been 3 hours," she'd chide, flipping her hair back. "Chloe needs her nap, and I need to be at my event." And Chloe, by then, a precocious 5-year-old, took her cues from her mother, responding with thin-lipped "thank you, Grandma," before striding away. That's when I discovered the trap I had fallen into, the cycle of sacrifice and ingratitude, the dark twin of codependency. I gave and gave, convinced it was love. They took and took, convinced it was their due. Each unreturned favor became a hairline crack in my heart. Each polite dismissal built up like a wave threatening to knock me under. I realized with a dull ache that love unbounded by respect was just a rope that bound me to pain. I began to notice my mistakes. First, I had believed that love must be unconditional to be true. But unconditional doesn't mean self-erasing. It means giving freely, but not until you lose yourself. Second, I'd never learnt to say no. When Melissa asked me to pick up Chloe every Thursday on top of my bakery and cleaning shifts, I'd rearrange my whole week. When she complained that my house was too small for playdates, I kept my mouth shut. I feared that any refusal would topple the fragile gratitude I still clung to. But each concession taught them that my boundaries were malleable, that my worth lay in what I do, not who I was. One afternoon, after a particular exchange where Melissa bypassed my homemade biscuits in favor of avocado toast from Starbucks, I went to the park with Chloe. She toddled ahead, chasing pigeons, her laughter bright. I sat on a bench, wiping sweat from my brow, and asked myself, when did love become a transaction? I realized I had spent decades equating my worth with my usefulness. If I wasn't needed, I wasn't loved, and I was tired, bone-deep tired of being useful. That evening, I brewed chamomile tea and sat at my kitchen table with a notebook. I wrote down the things I had never allowed myself to admit. I was lonely. I was exhausted. I felt invisible. Then I wrote down what I wanted: respect, autonomy, recognition that I was more than a rider-free babysitter, a bank account. I underlined those words until the ink blurred. In that moment, I made a different kind of promise to myself, not one of sacrifice, but of self-respect. The first test came the next week. Melissa called on short notice. "Mum, can you watch Chloe tomorrow from 9 to 5? My meeting got rescheduled. In the past, I would have said yes before she finished asking. But this time, I paused. I imagined the winter mornings spent waiting at her condo, the afternoons watching TV alone, while Chloe napped in my arms. I thought of my aching feet and my empty fridge, and I said, "I'm sorry, dear. I have appointments tomorrow. I can't move." The tremor in my voice surprised me, but I held firm. I half expected outrage, an angry fine, but instead, she hesitated. "Oh," she said softly, "I guess I'll figure something out." The line went dead. I felt a pang of guilt, but it faded quickly. For the first time in years, I didn't wait for her gratitude. I didn't count on her approval. I simply let the silence stand. That night, I sat with my journal again. I wrote, "I deserve to live my life too." Those words carried me through the lonely ache of rebuilding my identity. I started saying yes to myself. I enrolled in a watercolor class at the community center, something I had wanted to do since I retired. I spent Saturday mornings at the library paging through novels I'd never had time to read. When friends invited me for coffee, I went without worrying about whether I'd have time to babysit next week. As I filled my days with small joys, I noticed a shift in the mirror. My shoulders relaxed. My eyes lit up when I spoke about my art. Even Chloe seemed to notice. At her 6th birthday party, where Melissa hovered, checking her phone, Chloe ran up and hugged me. "Grandma, your painting is on the wall," she exclaimed, pointing to a watercolor sunrise I'd donated to the hall. For a moment, her smile was pure delight, not obligation. The most surprising change, though, was in Melissa. One afternoon, I received a text, "Mum, I'm sorry. No qualifiers, no demands, just an apology." She wrote that she'd been busy, that she'd taken me for granted, that she loved my cookies after all, and would I share the recipe? I smiled so wide my cheeks hurt. I thought about the years I'd spent giving without boundaries. I thought about the long road back to respect, and I replied I'd love to come visit and bake with you. When I arrived at her house, the kitchen smelled of vanilla and sugar. Chloe greeted me with a giggle, tugging at my lace sleeve. Melissa hovered nearby, eyes soft. As we mixed dough and laughed over flour-dusted countertops, I realized that this was the real gift, love tempered by respect, nurtured by mutual care, not coercion. I had learned the hard way that giving doesn't mean losing yourself, and that reclaiming your worth often begins with a simple, shaky no. In the quiet glow of that kitchen, I understood that my life's value was never defined by my sacrifices, but by my right to choose. And in choosing myself, I had found the freedom to love on my terms. In the next section, we'll dive into the legal tools and strategies that empower you to protect your assets and ensure your wishes are honored, no matter what challenges life may bring. I sat at my kitchen table one crisp autumn morning, a steaming mug of tea warming my hands, and I realized it was time to speak with someone who understood the language of legacy better than I did. For 30 years, Mr. Jenkins had been my lawyer, quiet, steady, armed with a gentle Midwestern drawl and an encyclopedic knowledge of estate planning. I dialed his number, my heart thumping with a mixture of relief and resolve. "Margaret," he answered after 2 rings. "What can I do for you today?" I cleared my throat. I need to make sure nothing can ever threaten my home or my independence again. I want to understand exactly how power of attorney works and whether I should set up a trust or both. "Good." He said, his tone professional but welcoming. "Let's start with the basics." He explained that a power of attorney, or POA, is a legal document granting someone else the authority to act on your behalf, managing finances, signing checks, making healthcare decisions. If you become unable to do so yourself, you can choose a trusted family member, a friend, or even a professional fiduciary, he said. But you have to weigh convenience against risk. If that person abuses their power, it can be very hard to undo. I thought back to Melissa and Chloe's hushed conversation in my living room, the way they had co-conspired to portray me as forgetful, ready to push me into the shadows. My blood, my own flesh and blood, had schemed behind my back. How easy it could have been for them to use a poorly drafted POA to wrest control overnight. "So if I give someone POA," I said slowly, "they could move money from my accounts sell property, even admit me to a facility without my consent. In extreme cases, yes, he confirmed. That's why many people opt for a springing power of attorney, which only takes effect when a doctor certifies incapacity. But even that has its pitfalls. Who decides incapacity? You're just deferring a judgment call to someone else. I nodded, absorbing each nuance. A POA could protect me if I were truly incapacitated, say after a stroke or a sudden illness, but it could also become a weapon then. Mr. Maud, Jenkins turned to living trusts. A revocable living trust allows you to transfer ownership of assets, your house, your bank accounts, investments into the trust with you as trustee. You maintain control while you're alive and competent. If you become incapacitated as successor trustee, you've named steps in without the need for court proceedings. And on your death, the assets pass to your beneficiaries without probate. His words painted a clear roadmap. Move everything into trust, remove easy backdoor access, avoid the slow, public expensive probate labyrinth. What about an irrevocable trust? I asked. That's stronger, he said. Assets you place into an irrevocable trust are no longer legally yours. They're protected from creditors' lawsuits, and in many cases family members who might try to claim them. But you also give up control. You can't change the beneficiaries or dissolve the trust without agreement from everyone involved. I took a sip of tea, letting the flavor ground me. I knew I didn't want my home to disappear behind legal walls, so thick that I couldn't tap into my own equity if I needed to. But I also knew that revocable trusts could be reversed, so they offered less protection. The irrevocable trust felt like a vault with no key, which frightened me. Yet for my financial accounts, investment portfolios, retirement savings, it might be the perfect solution. Here's what I propose, Mr. Jenkins said after a thoughtful pause. We'll create a revocable living trust for the house where you remain trustee and sole beneficiary during your lifetime. We'll name yourself and then designate 2 successor trustees. You choose people who genuinely care for you, not those who see a windfall. For your financial accounts, we'll use an irrevocable trust with specific beneficiaries who are family members and friends. You've vetted people who love you for you, not for your assets. Then we'll draft a durable POA for healthcare decisions. Someone you trust implicitly. Perhaps your longtime neighbour Linda, set to spring only upon a written certification by 2 physicians. I pictured my neighbour Linda, whose teenage son I'd helped tutor in history. She visited every Sunday with fresh apples from her orchard. There was no hesitation she would honour my wishes, not her own. Finally, he added, "We should include a no-contest clause in your trust and will. If anyone challenges these documents, they forfeit any inheritance. That way Melissa and Chloe understand there's no use in trying." I exhaled, feeling the weight of uncertainty lift. A plan was unfolding piece by piece, clear, deliberate, protective, and all of it tailored to my life. Over the next 2 weeks, Mr. Jenkins and I met in his office, paper strewn across a polished oak desk, law books, towering around us like ancient sentinels. I signed documents, initialed paragraphs, and listened as he explained each paragraph in plain English. Each time he paused for my questions, I felt more confident this was my life, my legacy, and I was reclaiming it. On the final day, he handed me the binder containing my estate plan, a revocable living trust for my home, an irrevocable trust for my financial accounts, a durable springing POA for medical decisions, and an updated will reinforcing everything. There, at the very end, lay the no contest clause underlined in red. "You're all set," he said, closing the binder carefully. "Keep this in a safe place and let me know if anything changes." I thanked him, my voice steady. I drove home that afternoon with the binder on the passenger seat, its presence oddly comforting. I parked under the maple tree in my driveway, sunlight filtering through the leaves, and I opened the car door. In that moment, I realized how thoroughly I had been hiding under a bushel of fear, obligation, and misplaced trust. Now I had tools not to build walls of bitterness, but to stand firm in my dignity. That evening, I wrote letters to the people I had chosen as successor trustees and beneficiaries. To Linda, I explained why I had chosen her for my medical POA, how her kindness and integrity had uplifted me for years. To my nephew Daniel and my goddaughter Maria, I detailed the trusts I was establishing, expressing my gratitude and trust in them. And to the distant cousins who had always sent birthday cards, I wrote simple notes of appreciation, asking them to take on small roles in my legacy. As the ink dried, I folded each letter into an envelope. I felt a quiet pride. By planning thoughtfully, I wasn't shutting my family out. I was inviting the right people in. I was teaching everyone that love and responsibility go hand in hand, and that legacy is not about who puts their name on a deed, but who honors your life's work. In the days that followed, I filed the documents with the court as needed, made copies for my financial institutions, and safeguarded the originals in a fireproof box. I even scanned them into a secure cloud storage, just one more layer of protection. And each time I saw the sleek black binder on my shelf, I felt the soft echo of security. This was my home, my life, my choices shielded from any future storm. That winter, when Melissa stopped by with Chloe, tugging at her hand, she carried her phone rather than her usual air of entitlement. We sat at my kitchen table, the scent of cinnamon lingering from the scones I had baked. She looked at the binder on the counter and hesitated. "Mum," she said quietly, "I've been thinking. I'm sorry for how things went." I set down my teacup. "I'm listening," I said. Gently, she sighed, the words heavy with years of misunderstanding. I didn't realize. I didn't understand how much I was taking for granted. "Thank you for everything you've done. I want to make this right." I reached across the table and took her hand. "I know I said, and I want our relationship to be about more than deeds and dollars. Let's start fresh." That spring, as the cherry blossoms bloomed again in the park, I watched Chloe twirl in the petals and felt a soft contentment settle in my chest. I was no longer just a giver. I was a guardian of my own story. The legal structures I'd put in place weren't armor against joy. They were bridges to genuine connection, safe and strong. And with each passing day, I lived proof that wisdom, warmth, and careful planning could rewrite even the most painful chapters, transforming fear into freedom and duty into true devotion. In the next section, we'll explore how to build emotional resilience and community support, so you never have to navigate life's challenges alone. Some evenings I used to lie awake in the dark, replaying every unkind word, every cold shoulder, every whispered rumor. My heart would pound as if I were living through it all again, and I'd wonder how anyone, especially someone my age, could feel so utterly alone. But over the years, I've learned that resilience isn't about denying the pain. It's about learning how to tend to it, to cultivate new soil in which fresh growth can take root. It began with a simple invitation that arrived in my mailbox one crisp morning, a flyer for a Mindful Moments workshop at the community center. The words stood out in bright blue script, promising gentle meditation, journaling exercises, and a supportive circle. My first thought was, what am I, a teenager again? But then I remembered how I used to lean on Mr. Jenkins's steady calm, and I realized that I could ask for support, too. So I tucked the flyer into my purse and showed up the next Tuesday dressed in my coziest sweater and armed with an open heart. Inside the pastel-colored room, folding chairs formed a circle. A small group of us, 6 women and 2 men, sat with our eyes closed, hands resting gently on our knees. The instructor, a soft-spoken woman named Marisol, guided us through a 5-minute breathing exercise, inviting us to notice the weight of our lungs expanding the rise and fall of our chests. At first, my mind raced with to-do lists, old regrets, fears of future slights. But as I focused on the anchor of my breath, a hush fell over my thoughts that I hadn't felt in years. Afterward, we passed around leather-bound journals and coloured pens. Marisol prompted us. Write about a time you felt small, and then a time you felt strong. I hesitated, then scribbled about the spring festival mud. I felt small when I tasted that cold muck on my cheek and heard my own blood laugh at me. But I felt strong every time I refused to be silenced afterward. Every appointment I kept, every trust document I signed. By the time I looked up, my cheeks were damp, not from sorrow alone, but from the power of acknowledging both humility and triumph. Over the next few weeks, I returned to the workshop. I learned mindfulness techniques, body scans, mindful walking, gratitude practices that I wove into my morning tea ritual. I started scribbling in my journal even on days I felt fine, so I could notice subtle shifts, the way crisp autumn air invigorated me, or how the first crocus of spring stirred surprise in my chest. I discovered that naming my feelings gave them less control over me. I wasn't a drowning woman being pulled under by grief or anger. I was a gardener choosing which weeds to uproot and which flowers to water. One afternoon after class, Marisol mentioned a caregivers support group that met every Thursday afternoon. It's for anyone who gives and gives without getting much in return, she said, her eyes kind. You'd be welcome. My first instinct was to decline. I've been through worse, I told myself. But I also remembered how strangers at the festival had shown compassion, but when my own family did not. So I noted the time and date and walked out with a flutter of hope. That Thursday, I arrived at a small church basement where folding tables and mismatched sofas formed a cozy meeting space. A dozen people, including some spouses, caring for chronically ill partners, parents of special needs children, and a man in his 70s who'd lost his brother, sat in a circle. We took turns introducing ourselves, our names, our caregiving roles, and one word to describe how we felt that day. My turn came, and I said, Margaret, I'm a grandmother, and today I feel unseen. It felt awkward to admit out loud, but as soon as I did, 30, eyes softened, nodding in understanding. We spent the next hour speaking honestly, the fatigue that settled in our bones, the guilt at wanting personal time, the frustration of relentless demands. A woman named Carol shared how she'd started walking her dog at dawn, carving out 30 minutes of silence before her day truly began. Another man, Jack, talked about the solace he found in calligraphy, tracing letters by hand to slow down his racing mind. And through it all, we listened without judgment, offered small suggestions, and simply bore witness to each other's stories. I left the meeting that day lighter than I'd been in months. For the first time, I realized that community wasn't just about family ties or bloodlines. It was about people who saw you, honored you, and stood ready to catch you if you faltered. I began weaving these connections into my life. I arranged monthly coffee dates with Linda, who had kindly agreed to be my medical proxy. We talked about everything: her daughter's college applications, my watercolor classes, our shared love of crossword puzzles. I reconnected with Daniel, my nephew who invited me to join his weekly gardening club. We pruned rose bushes together and shared laughter over which shrubs would survive our clumsy pruning shears. At home, I created a small altar in the corner of my living room, a framed photo of my husband and child, a glass jar filled with smooth river stones collected on family vacations, and a tiny potted succulent that reminded me of resilience, green and steadfast, in a little pot. Every evening I lit a candle there and reflected on three things I was grateful for: a supportive friend, a quiet moment with my journal, the warmth of something as simple as chamomile tea. Those rituals became anchors, reminders that my inner world, God, deserved tending just as much as my legal foundation. As the months passed, I encountered challenges, days when old sorrow crept back in, when a neighbour offhandedly asked how my memory issues were, or when Chloe's laughter, once so pure, now carried the echo of past cruelty. But I had tools to meet those moments. I paused, took 3 deep breaths, and reminded myself I was safe. I opened my journal and poured out the sting, then closed it, and shifted my focus to something nourishing: a phone call with an old friend, 30 minutes of gentle yoga, or a bowl of fresh fruit on the porch. One of the most touching moments came when my watercolour class held a small gallery showing at the community library. My painting, a sunrise over a quiet lake, hung beside works by younger artists and seasoned painters alike. As people wandered through, a teenage boy named Marcus stopped in front of my piece, his eyes wide. "This is so peaceful," he said. "Did you paint this after something hard happened?" I nodded, explaining how spring mud and family strife had led me to rediscover hope in colour. Marcus lingered, then squeezed my hand gently. "Thank you," he said. "I think I need to learn that too." In that moment, I realized my journey wasn't just personal therapy. It was a beacon for others who felt lost in dark chapters of their own stories. My grief and my healing were threads in a larger tapestry of human experience. Everyone faces seasons of trouble, but we don't have to endure them in isolation. As winter thawed into spring again, I invited my support group friends to a potluck in my sunroom. The table overflowed with casseroles, salads, and pies, each dish a testament to care and connection. We laughed over mashed potatoes, shared hopes for the coming year, and promised to look out for one another. No titles were needed. No grandmother. No caregiver, no lawyer, just people who chose kindness. That evening, as I washed the last of the dishes and heard the soft hum of friendly chatter drifting from the living room, I felt a profound sense of belonging. I had rebuilt my support network brick by brick. I had learned to stand not on my own, but with others beside me. My resilience was no longer an island fortress, but a shared garden where each of us tended our own row of flowers, offering blooms and pruning each other's weeds. I never expected to find a second family in yoga mats and community centres, but life has a way of surprising you when you're willing to ask for help. And the greatest lesson I've learned is that vulnerability is not weakness, it's the seed of connection. By admitting where I hurt and embracing others' kindness, I discovered a strength deeper than steel, the ability to grow roots in the hearts of genuine friends. In the next section, we'll explore how your legacy can reach beyond your lifetime, how sharing your stories, wisdom, and values creates ripples that endure long after any legal document. I never thought I'd be the type to dust off a typewriter or stare at blank pages wondering what to say. But there I was, one brisk April morning, sitting at my sunroom desk with a mug of tea steaming beside a stack of yellowed photographs. I picked up the first image, my wedding day, 22 years old, and full of hope, and felt something stir in my chest. All those years of deal, of legal battles, personal reckonings, and community circles had led me here to a reminder that the heart of any legacy isn't only the documents you sign, but the stories you share and the lives you touch. I pulled out an old notebook where I'd begun jotting memories the first time Richard kissed me beneath a June sunset. The aroma of fresh bread drifting from the bakery when Melissa was born, the way Chloe's laughter once rang like bells through my kitchen. I realized these recollections, fleeting moments of joy and sorrow, were the most precious heirlooms I could leave. So I decided to write them down one by one, not as a formal memoir, but as letters addressed to the women and men I loved. That afternoon, I typed the first line: My dearest Melissa, when you read this, know that every sacrifice I made was because I believed in your wings. I paused, heart fluttering, and continued. Remember how we used to bake cookies on Sunday mornings? The way the dough would billow and the kitchen would fill with laughter. That is the legacy I wish for you: warmth, togetherness, and the courage to pursue what lights your soul. Over the next weeks, I divided my writing into sections: childhood love-loss lessons, learned, and wishes for the future. In each chapter, I included small exercises, prompts for reflection, blank spaces for their own memories, so the letters would become living dialogues. To my nephew Daniel, I wrote about the safety I found in his childhood hugs. To my goddaughter Maria, I tucked in watercolor sketches of the sunrise lake I'd painted. To my community friends, I dedicated pages of gratitude for their kindness and support, reminding them that family extends beyond blood. As I worked, I realized how liberating it was to move from legal language, the precise clauses, the no-contest barriers, to this tender territory of emotion. Here I could speak freely about regret and redemption, about how near I'd come to losing everything, and how in finding myself I discovered a richer inheritance. My hands trembled sometimes, especially when recalling the pain of Chloe's mockery, but each teardrop on the page was a seed of something new. The wisdom to understand that hurt can transform into healing when shared. One evening I invited a few friends over for a legacy tea. I set my table with mismatched china lace doilies and the muffins I'd baked that morning. Linda, my neighbour and medical proxy, arrived with tulips. Carol from the support group brought her homemade jam. Jack, the calligrapher, brought a scroll of his elegant lettering. I told them about my project writing letters as living testaments and asked for their help in refining the drafts. As they read aloud snippets, my voice caught in my throat when I heard them speak my words. I realized that co-creating this legacy was as important as authoring it. They suggested adding stories of gratitude to future generations, notes of encouragement to chase dreams, and even a family recipe section for Melissa and Chloe to keep alive. Emboldened, I expanded the project. I reached out to the local library to host a small story share night, where I and other elders could read passages from our letters and encourage younger attendees to begin their own. The library agreed, and I spent afternoons preparing select excerpts. The night of the event, the reading room glowed under soft lights as people of all ages gathered: teens in hoodies, retired couples with knitted shawls, parents cradling toddlers. I read my letter to Chloe, now 6, speaking of the curiosity she once carried in her eyes, and urging her to keep that wonder alive, even when the world seemed to pressure her to grow up too fast. Afterward, a teenage girl approached me. "Your words about the lake sunrise made me want to paint again," she whispered. "A young father said, 'I'll bring my son next time he needs to hear stories like yours.'" Their faces, open and moved, reminded me that legacy is not static. It blooms afresh when it meets receptive hearts. My story had become a spark, inviting others to honor their own experiences and pass them along. Back at home, I organized a mentorship circle. I sent invitations to anyone who had ever expressed interest in art writing or simply in connecting across generations. Every other Saturday, we met in my sunroom, surrounded by my paintings and photos, to share work-in-progress poems, essays, small sculptures made from clay. I offered gentle feedback, shared prompts to help them dig deeper, and reminded them that their voices mattered. One of my first mentees, a young man named Carlos, confided that he'd never thought his family would care about his dreams of becoming a writer. "You make me believe it's possible," he told me after our third session. Meanwhile, I knew I had to finalize the story of my material legacy too. With Mr. Jenkins's guidance, I drafted one final addendum to my trust, not only distributing assets to my chosen beneficiaries, but also establishing a small goodwill fund for community arts and elder support. A modest annual scholarship funded by a portion of my savings would award a deserving local student pursuing studies in social work or creative writing fields close to my heart. I imagined the ripple effect, young workers empowered to care for families, to uplift neighbours, to keep the tradition of compassion alive. When the paperwork was done, I gathered my family, Melissa, Chloe, Daniel, Maria, for a small ceremony in my living room. I read aloud the section about the Goodwill Fund, inviting them to help select the first recipient. Melissa's eyes shone with something like pride, and Chloe perched on my lap, her small fingers tracing the letters on the page. I could see that despite past wounds, this collaborative act was weaving new threads of unity. Together we planned to hold the first scholarship ceremony next spring, celebrating a student who, like me, believed in the power of love and creativity. Through all this, I often thought back to that spring festival, the moment when mud and mockery collided to awaken me. If that had been the end of my story, it would have been a tragedy. Instead, it became the prologue to a tale of resilience, empowerment, and shared legacy. Because real inheritance isn't only the deeds and the dollars, it's the laughter we foster, the tears we acknowledge, the encouragement we give, and the values we pass on generation to generation. Now, when I sit by the window and watch the garden bloom, I feel a profound gratitude. My legacy isn't confined to what sits in a safe deposit box. It grows in the pages of letters, in the hearts of young writers, in the petals of scholarship awards, and in the gentle guidance I offer each Saturday. I've learned that every act of kindness, every story told, every seed planted, literal or figurative, becomes part of a tapestry that transcends time. If you're reading this and wondering how to begin your own legacy work, start simply. Write a letter to someone you love, share a meal with a neighbour, volunteer in a cause that stirs you. Record your memories in your own words. Because legacy isn't an abstract concept reserved for the famous or the wealthy. It's the quiet imprint each of us leaves in the lives we touch. And so, as I close my notebook this evening, I look forward to the future with peaceful clarity. The chapters of my life, joy and sorrow, giving and setting boundaries, are now woven into something enduring and beautiful. My inheritance will not be judged by balance sheets, but by the warmth of community, the spark of creativity in young hearts, and the simple truth that when we share our stories, we give each other the most precious gift of all the knowledge that we matter. In the next section, we'll explore practical steps you can take today to begin crafting your own living legacy, because it's never too early, and certainly never too late to make your story part of something greater.